We have Jason Teitler. He's SVP Global Communications and Brand Lead at Special Olympics. We also have Jordan Marie brings 3 White Horses Daniel, who is a professional runner, athlete advocate, and founder of Rising Hearts. And then lastly, John Balkam, who's the founder and CEO of the Third Wing Group. So maybe starting with Jason, would you maybe provide a little bit more detail about your background? And then we can ask the others to provide that as well.
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you for having me on the panel. My name is Jason Teitler, and I handle communications and brand for Special Olympics International, which means I have the great pleasure and honor of working with our athletes, meaning people with intellectual disabilities in nearly 200 countries and territories. My background is over 2 decades of experience on the agency side. So I worked at firms under the umbrellas of Omnicom and WPP, where I met Special Olympics, and then I made the jump to Special Olympics.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jordan?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be virtually with all of you for this conversation. Again, I am a runner, 4th generation. I'm the founder and organizer of Rising Hearts, really trying to cultivate community in a lot of meaningful and sustainable ways intersectionally, and just do a lot of community organizing and activism, and also intersect that with my love and passion of running. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and share more about the work that I get to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Jordan. And John?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Balkam. I'm the founder and managing partner of Third Wing Group, also known as TWG. And I'm also the author of a book called 3 Win Sponsorship, which is about the next generation of sports entertainment marketing. And I'm really thrilled to be here with you all. Looking forward to the great conversation and diving in.
Great. Thank you. Really excited that you're all here. All right. So let's get the juices flowing a little bit. It's a Friday afternoon, so let's start with an exercise. So what I'd like to do for those who are on the line and listening in is, if you could, in the chat box, type in examples of what you think are an effective brand athlete partnership. So kind of the first ones that come to mind, just type them in the chat. Don't be shy. No wrong answers. Nice. Nike, Michael Jordan, Colin Kaepernick, Nike. Nike's showing up a lot. Can be outside of sports as well. Nike, Jordan, Nike. All right, a lot of Nike. Under Armour. All right. Great. All right, those are all great examples. So I'm going to pose the first question to Jason, put you on the spot a little bit. So when you look at this list that just came through, and also reflect on your extensive experience crafting and leading brand strategy in the sports field, what are some of the keys for success for these partnerships? Is there anything in common that you feel like makes them effective partnerships?
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think there is something in common for effective partnerships, and that's the word partnerships. All too often, brands go into a relationship as a sponsor, where it's just transactional, and there is an exchange of, let's say, logos for property to put those logos on. And I think it needs to be a much more in-depth type of relationship, where there is a symbiotic relationship between the brand and the athlete that is supporting that brand. In our case, with our Special Olympics athletes all over the world, including our athlete supporters, both from the professional and amateur world, it's all about authenticity. So when we do work with a brand like Coca-Cola, which is our founding partner, United Airlines, Microsoft, Toyota, it is all about working together to help propagate the message and the urgency for inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. And if we have a brand that is a partner that is not necessarily living up to that partnership, we truly do want to talk with them about ways that they can get even more involved in helping to support people all over the world, those with and without intellectual disabilities, in so many ways. We have a lot of good examples of that. United Airlines being one of the greatest examples, where they have hired Special Olympics athletes to be on staff to help their staff better understand what it means to be a passenger with intellectual disabilities, so that everybody is much more comfortable. That is a partnership, and I think that's the word people need to anchor on when exploring a relationship between brands and athletes.
No, that's fascinating. And to me, it seems like Special Olympics is unique in that you have your athletes that are competing, but you also have a number of celebrity ambassadors. And forgive me if that's not the right term, but maybe a different set of athletes that you could partner with potentially going forward. I mean, maybe just starting with your athletes. I mean, what is that process like within your teams to start thinking about, hey, here's this athlete that we want to be maybe a more visible advocate for our brand, or who we want to promote, or we want a partnership, or kind of promote a little bit more? Like, how do you determine the qualities of that athlete? And then how do you partner them with the right organization if you've had conversations with, say, United Airlines or some other type of commercial entity that is interested in a partnership?
Fantastic question, because I think it certainly does rely on the root of our organization. We have 4 cornerstones. People think that we're only a sports organization. And while we do a lot in sports, and we started as a sports organization 53 years ago, thanks to Eunice Kennedy Shriver, we've also expanded across the globe to support people with intellectual disabilities in health, in education, and, to get to your question, leadership. And we have athlete leaders all throughout the world that are very much comfortable in being advocates for inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities, for being spokespeople, not just for the Special Olympics movement, but also the brands that support the Special Olympics movement. And they're very confident and extremely capable at carrying messages for both our brand as well as the brand that's supporting Special Olympics. But we make sure to try to find the individual passion points of those athletes that we want to put on the front lines to be able to talk about both brands, and make sure that there's a comfort level, make sure that there's certainly some background in understanding the industry in which the brand partner is in, and then certainly better understanding the skills of that individual while developing those skills, so that they can become effective ambassadors for the movement. And during that training, it's usually hand in hand with our brand partners. Again, back to that word partnership. And depending on the geography, we also make sure to match up the right athletes with the right brand.
Oh, that's really interesting. And it seems like it's a very intentional and kind of dedicated process. One thing that I've been thinking about is maybe the difference between an established star or an established athlete versus an emerging athlete. I mean, what role does that play as you think about someone who might be a good candidate for this training program and eventually becoming someone more kind of representative of Special Olympics or a major brand? Like, how does that play into the decision?
Well, I think also you got to factor in the news cycle, right? What's actually going on in the world based on the news flow, and what our key audience is going to be looking for. And in some cases, that does involve bringing in a more established athlete that has been with Special Olympics for quite some time and has very much transcended from being an athlete to being other parts of the organization and helping the organization grow and prosper. In other instances, it's very appropriate to discuss more of our emerging athletes, meaning athletes who have more recently smashed all perceptions that people have of those with intellectual disabilities. And a good example of that is one of our newest celebrity ambassadors and Special Olympics athlete, Chris Nikic, who became the first person with Down syndrome to complete an Ironman and then went on to complete some marathons. He's training for his next Ironman now, and he was certainly an emerging athlete. Now he's very much a global celebrity, and he fits both buckets: celebrity ambassador as well as our athlete ambassador who went through our programming and continues to support the movement.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and really impressive athletic accomplishments as well. Speaking of athletic accomplishments, I'm actually going to turn to Jordan because I'd like to turn the tables a little bit and just think about this issue from the athlete perspective. So from the elite athlete perspective, I mean, what are you looking for in a potential sponsor or a brand partner? Especially as, Jason mentioned this idea of partnership, like what are you looking for if this is going to be a long-term relationship?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's been, and having gone through multiple sponsorships, I would say it's more about, I would even take it a step further, kinship, not just partnership. Something that is very much reciprocal, not transactional, especially coming as an Indigenous runner, a woman, kind of checking off these diversity boxes. I don't want to be just a check in a box. And that's how I felt sadly with past sponsorships, is because, oh, you're the Indigenous runner, we need to increase our diversity. Oh, you're the Indigenous runner who dedicated their marathon to 26 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so they bring me on to their space, but yet they didn't build or create a culture and environment that was really supportive of me and the advocacy that I do. And so now that we're seeing more athletes intersecting their love and passion of sport with advocacy, there's not enough, I would say, development and like fostering a better, more supportive environment for those athletes, because they're not thinking about the mental health of what it means to be on the front lines, what it means to be doing this hard work and advocacy every single day. It can take its toll on an athlete, and that can then intersect with your performance as an athlete at the same time. And so there are a lot of factors that contribute to an athlete advocate. And so now we're starting to see this transition of more brands and sports, programs that are trying to be more supportive of an actual athlete advocate, someone who's not 100% dedicated to trying to make the Olympics or trying to get the fastest time or trying to get that medal. We still have those ambitions, and maybe we still are accomplishing some of that. But what's really important to us is using this platform and mechanism to give our sport and love of movement a higher purpose and a deeper meaning, in conveying these really important messages and running for those who are no longer here and being a voice for those who are no longer here. And so what I'm looking for with a brand, in terms of a sponsorship, is something that's gonna back me and back the community that I am bringing with me. It's not just me you're sponsoring a whole community behind me and with me and alongside me. And if we can't collaboratively work together to create space to make an impact and make a difference, so that not only Indigenous youth or runners can see themselves within the sport and do this work, but we want everyone to feel safe. We want everyone to feel visible and to have everyone feel like they have an opportunity to be a voice, and say and how they want this kinship to be done and how it can be carried through. So I'm very, after learning those lessons of the first couple partnerships that I had, I'm very, very, I would say, strong voiced when I'm being approached by new, potential sponsors. And so I will lay it out and I will say, what my past experiences have been, and they've sadly have been disappointing, where we've had to like terminate the contracts because they didn't fulfill all of their commitments that they said that they were going to do for me and my community. And that's just what I'm looking for, that this isn't just mutually beneficial for me, but that it's beneficial and can make a difference for my community. And examples of that is like being able to donate product to youth programs, to tribes, to Native organizations, to community members who are just in need of shoes because running isn't always accessible and affordable. So that's what we do a lot of through the advocacy, not only for myself personally, but also through the work of Rising Hearts, is establishing those kinships and relationships and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to be seen and heard, and that we have opportunities to hold things in person. So that way the brand or company has an opportunity to be there, to sit, listen, and learn, to see what it's like to be part of the advocacy world and see how it can be integrated and woven into their commitments of the things that they want to fulfill with justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Well, that's great. And thank you for walking through, both, the successes as well as some of the challenges as well. I mean, one question and thought in my mind as you're speaking is, just the role that education plays in terms of the athlete, maybe educating the brand, and maybe some of that goes both ways. But, if let's say a brand identifies you as someone because of your athletic prowess and, you know, your time and your running trials, and they don't necessarily know as much about your advocacy or about the issues that you really want to support. Like, how do you start to introduce that as an athlete and make that a key component of that relationship? Like, what is that education process like, and how do you continue to strengthen the kinship through that early on in the conversation versus maybe years later?
Yeah, and I know everyone in the world is not going to be like me, but I'm just someone who lays it all out right
Yeah.
up front. I don't want to sugarcoat anything. I don't want anything to be a surprise. I want people to know who they are going to be learning about and spending time and investing in by sharing everything that I do and trying to look for opportunities of how they can collaborate and provide space and be part of that with us. And so I always will ask to be part of the EDI team, or be part of an advisory group if there's opportunity for that, or we create one. Like with one of the sponsorships that I had, we created an athlete ambassador advisory board for that. And so that's one of the first things I'll do is I'll ask to be part of EDI teams and conversations, and making sure that any language that's being put out there, making sure it's not harmful, making sure it's not going to be, excluding anybody within that, not even just for Indigenous athletes and runners or anything like that, but it's just being part of those conversations and making sure that we as athletes are also kind of upholding and holding them accountable as the brand or the sponsor to be doing the things that they're committed to. And then also, asking to see if there are opportunities internally to hold, a talking circle or a discussion to introduce myself to the whole other athlete brands and company and employees, to share about who I am and kind of present myself and be like, this is all that I do, and share all of, the work that we're doing, and asking them to be part of our community too. We want this to be beneficial for both of us, and opportunities to learn from each other. So that's some of the things that I'll really advocate for, and things that I'll demand to be put in a contract, especially if something has to be signed to establish this kind of kinship and sponsorship. But yeah, it's these kind of check boxes for me to make sure that okay, if they're willing to commit to these things, then I'm more open to continuing this discussion. If they're not ready to kind of address some of the blatant, obvious things that are kind of wrong in society right now with the civil unrest and social injustice and systemic oppression and racism, if they're not ready to tackle those kinds of conversations, then they're not ready to fulfill those kind of commitments in terms of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so I've had conversations with brands that were kind of we don't like saying that word, or they want to be politically, not connected to that, and just want to just create a business, create product, and that's it. But as we've seen throughout time, sport has been such an incredible platform and mechanism to convey some of these most important topics that are happening in society that are impacting so many people. And you can't ignore that.
Absolutely. Well, that's actually a good segue to get John into the conversation, because I know you kind of work with Third Wind Group at this intersection between brands as well as athletes. So before we dive in, can you just tell us a little bit more about Third Wind Group and what really motivated you to found that a few years back?
Yeah, sure thing. And, ultimately why we created TWG is we felt like there needed to be an agency for activist athletes, and more broadly for activist talent. So, I started, as a solo artist myself 3 years ago with Third Wind Group. And the impetus for starting the company was because I had this book coming out called 3-Win Sponsorship. And I felt like the thesis of the book was strong enough, and I felt I believed in it enough that I was like, I should also turn this into a business. And the thesis of 3-Win Sponsorship was essentially, we need to embed impact, purpose, legitimate causes into sports and entertainment marketing if anybody's going to actually care about what we have to say. Now, the other part of it was, how do we do that effectively? Because we all know greenwashing, cause washing can happen quite a bit when we do stuff like this. But I was observing that more and more athletes, I mean, there is a long history too of athletes who are also activists and advocates for the greater good and who try and pull us towards, the better parts of our nature. You can go back to Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Russell and many others, Billie Jean King, just to name a few. But I felt like there was this increase in activist athletes in this generation. Certainly we saw that from summer 2020 really ramped it up. But I started in 2019 and I was seeing that, stuff like with Colin Kaepernick, I was seeing that this is where the world is going. This is where athletes are going. They're going to that place of becoming more than an athlete. I think, athletes are always more than an athlete, and that it was really kind of not a great idea for us to pigeonhole athletes ever, because in what other profession do we pigeonhole people to just their profession? But anyway, TWG, we've built an agency designed to serve mission-driven talent. So that includes athletes, that includes musicians, that includes, I have a stand-up comedian who we just signed, and that includes entrepreneurs as well, who are really driving things forward throughout society, through business, through charitable work, etc. So yeah, that's a little bit about us, and we're trying to innovate in sponsorship. We feel like people are so used to billboards and ballparks and slapping logos, and we feel like we need to push the whole marketing, the whole sponsorship industry forward and start to embed legitimate purpose and legitimate causes into marketing, and that will actually help us be effective marketers or more effective marketers. So we can dive into some examples, but that's just a good way to set the table.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear examples if you're willing to share them. I mean, maybe just if you could use an example, or you can leave the name out. But I mean, let's say you have an athlete that comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to be part of Third Win Group, and I'm really have this particular issue that I'm passionate about that's impact related." Like, how do you connect them with the right brand? Like, what is that? What are those conversations like? What criteria are you thinking about? And yeah, how are you talking especially to the brands about this and showing the value of what this partnership could be for everyone?
Sure. Well, with our athlete clients, a lot of it is just starting to understand what is your mission, number one, and then going within and speaking with the athlete about, okay, what is your mission? What are you uniquely designed, and what is your unique purpose, right? And defining that first, and then getting really clear on that. And then once we do that, it becomes pretty clear, okay, which companies can help you on your path, right? Which companies are aligned with you, which companies share your values. And then it's a little bit easier. Sponsorship is a lot like dating in that you're trying to find a match, right? And I oftentimes think of myself as a matchmaker, as a marketing agent. So what do we do when we're dating? We're trying to find people who share our values, right? And what I think was missing before we started was, marketing agents, and brands who were actually dating in such a way that they were like, oh, we do share the same values, and like we are on similar missions, and if we teamed up, we can actually provide even more value to this cause. We can provide even more value to this community. We can actually serve better. So, Jeremy Casebeer, he's the first client we brought on at TWG. He's a professional beach volleyball player on the AVP tour, and he's also an environmental advocate. So it was pretty easy. He already knew what his mission was, and it was to contribute to climate solutions. And then it was like, okay, what brands share that same value? Let's go talk to a beachwear company like Fair Harbor, which makes beachwear out of upcycled ocean plastic waste. And like, boom, that's perfect. Not only did it hit on the personal value side, it also hit on, well, he's a beach volleyball player and he needs to wear board shorts when he competes, right? And it becomes more clear, as you get to know and you really look at, again, your athletes are very complex, multifaceted people, right? It becomes very clear that, there are multiple ways to matchmake between, an athlete and a brand. such that, you know, you don't have to sacrifice your personal values. And in fact, you can further enhance your mission by partnering with the right brands. But then it also requires brands to have true commitments to those values, to true commitments to the mission in order for it to actually work and be authentic and actually land effectively.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that example that you provided is really helpful it's finding it's matchmaking, right? It's like finding the right partnership that's going to be effective for everybody. And, you know, I'm glad that you created this organization which provide those opportunities for both brands and athletes. You mentioned something interesting a few minutes ago around like feeling that maybe there has been this shift where maybe athletes are a little bit more outspoken about a particular social issue or a cause. And maybe if I can extend this question to the whole panel, I mean, to what extent do you feel like that is true, that athletes are a little bit more vocal about a cause, or in addition to being a professional basketball player, they're just as willing to talk about what they're doing for around climate change or social issue? Has there been a shift? And if so, what has contributed to that?
I would say the obvious, there has been a shift. And sadly, it took like the death of Ahmaud Arbery for these conversations to be happening, in terms of bringing these topics and issues to the forefront of sports, especially now that we're seeing it so much more often now. And then with everything else too, of like, you know, Eliza Fletcher being murdered as a runner, and more of these advocacy efforts are being put forth, and these harder conversations are starting to happen. But yeah, I would say for me, since I've noticed, I would say that was kind of the starting point where things started rolling, and brands and companies started to bring these conversations into the work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's sad that it has to take an incident like that for these things to happen.
I do believe that the current media environment has made it much more conducive for athletes to share their opinions and their voices in an unfiltered way. And when I say the media environment, I don't mean necessarily the traditional media environment. The social media environment certainly empowers all individuals to talk about things that are very important to them, and talk about them in a way where it's direct from the athlete to the target audience, whether that be a consumer, a decision maker, or a combination of the two. And I think many athletes are now feeling that they do have the power to be able to make real substantial change happen, because they can directly network with those that are in a position to change policies, whether it be policies within the circles of government, within, let's say, the business four walls, so to speak. And for Special Olympics, you know, a lot of people think that we're a charity for people with intellectual disabilities, but we're actually an inclusion movement led by our athletes. Our athletes are the number one megaphone for inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities within our movement, and the ability to give our athletes the power to be able to talk directly to audiences with the courtesy and the cooperation of our brand partners, as well as professional and amateur athletes that support Special Olympics, is just unheard of and incredibly powerful for the individual, for the family, for the entire Special Olympics movement, and quite frankly, for a lot of friends, and I mean literally friends, but also friends of the movement, such as governments and businesses, that really need to hear from people directly who are dealing with these issues, as opposed to only people who are championing the issues. And that's one of the reasons why we're also a movement for people with and without intellectual disabilities, helping to encourage people to change their behavior, one person at a time, one community at a time, one country at a time. So I think it's a combination of things. I agree with what Jordan mentioned, absolutely. And I think the current media environment just enables people to actually have a much more powerful and direct voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And John, go ahead.
Yeah, throw my 2 cents in here. And for what it's worth, you know, sports has, for a long time now, many decades, has been all about the Benjamins, right? And money alone does not make a fulfilling life. I think many of us would agree with that statement. And the combination of money alone isn't fulfilling for pro athletes. And, there's this amazing platform. You have a fan base, right? That comes with tremendous responsibility and opportunity, right? When you have people's attention, you can convert that attention into action, right? And that's what movements are, right? You're converting people's attention into action for some greater good that you believe in, right? And so there is a shift. It's actually been going on, but there's also been great examples from history of athletes who have led the charge on certain social issues, civil issues. But it's also about, I'm more than an athlete. I want to live a fulfilling life. I want to contribute to others. I want to serve others. And that's a beautiful thing. I think we should encourage that. We should applaud that. And then we should know that as marketers, that it's like, no, you're not just getting me, the runner in Jordan's case. You're not just getting me, the, professional beach volleyball player in Jeremy Casper's case. You're getting me, the whole person, who is a son, a father, and on and on and on, right? An activist, and on and on and on. So marketers should tap into that ability to work with a multifaceted, complex individual who has a lot to contribute.
Mm-hmm. No, and these are fascinating responses. And one thing I was thinking about as all three of you were talking is, what about the athlete, that the subset of athletes that maybe aren't vocal about a particular cause or issue, that maybe it's been percolating in their mind, they've been thinking about it, they have an interest in it, or they feel like it's important for them in this moment, or perhaps in their, post-retirement. Why do you think they're maybe hesitant to be more outspoken about that issue? And what would you say to them about the value of being a more vocal advocate or activist?
I can speak to this because we created a program specifically for this. Our program with Rising Hearts is called Running with Purpose. It's a collective, and we support 32 athlete advocates. And I would say maybe 5 of our athlete advocates are very new to the advocacy space. And we wanted this group to really bring together a diverse group of athletes who are intersecting their love and passion of movement and running with advocacy, but also creating space for those who are very new to it and want to learn more about how can one bring advocacy into their platform, into their running, whether they have a small platform or a big platform, whether you have thousands of followers or a couple hundreds of followers, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many people come to your profile or follow you or anything like that. It's about creating space to have these kinds of conversations and sharing, what you're standing up for, what you're fighting for, what you celebrate in, what you want to thrive in, what you want for the next generations, what you want for, the planet and everything. And so we meet twice a month where we talk about a variety of issues of things that we are doing within our own community. We host community runs to bring more people in. We're about to launch a campaign called Running with Purpose that's going to go out on social media, where it's going to be a big call to action, inviting people to join in this Running with Purpose, find out what is your purpose. And that's the first question you have to start as someone who is new to this is, what is it that you believe in? Or what is it that is kind of like I can't take this anymore. Like I can't be silent anymore. I can't ignore this anymore. Like, what is that driving factor? What is that moment? What is that question you're asking yourself? And then you run for it, or you move for it, and you talk about it. You start having these conversations within your family circles. You start going to these opportunities where community is gathering about these specific things for you to continue learning more, for you to grow into more of your confidence of being able to speak about it more, because that's also a big hesitancy too, is, in my own learning journey, I didn't just become an activist or community organizer and just did it all perfectly and was comfortable speaking in front of thousands of people at a march and a rally in DC. No, that took time. And I made so many mistakes. I was so nervous holding the mic or, the big microphone thing and like marching in the streets of DC with 200,000 people for the climate march. Was I nervous? Yes. Did I make mistakes? Yes, of course, we're all going to do that. But it took time for me to now come into a space where I can talk because I'm speaking with passion. I'm speaking with purpose because I know what I'm fighting for. I know what I stand for. And it makes it easier. And so when you find out what that is for you as an individual, it gets much easier because you're continuing to learn about it. You're continuing to get more passionate about it. And then you're getting more exposed to community and people who are like-minded like you, and learning from them and learning different communication styles, learning different creative outlets of how to express, what you believe in. So that's what our collective does. All of them range from, Run for Brianna, Justice for Brianna, Unity Runners, to adaptive athletes like Zach Friedley, who we have on our team, to Black Lives Matter, to climate, to just a variety of issues. And then we have, our athlete advocates who are very new, who are learning more about advocacy just by being in this cohort with us. And so another big part that we do is we collaborate with brands and companies to put exclusivity aside and to basically donate product to our athletes if they need it. So we've had a lot of brands donate product, donate comped entries so that we can bring our athletes to some of these amazing and incredible races and opportunities that they may not have had the opportunity to do so because it's either not affordable, it's not accessible, it's a bit nerve-wracking. And then we do a lot of networking with other community run groups to make sure that people are connected, especially when we're visiting different territories or different Indigenous lands or communities, that, we're creating space for them to feel welcomed and to feel comfortable and that they're not going to be alone in this. So that's part of like one of our programs that we do is specifically addressing this topic of how can we support those who are already doing this advocacy work, but also how can we bring in more people who are more curious and want to learn more about it at least, and maybe not want to tackle this issue right away, but can at least be in a safe environment and a safe space to learn from those who have been doing it, and so that they can figure it out on their own.
Yeah, it's Special Olympics. We have a lot of celebrity supporters, including professional and amateur athletes, that certainly want to have a voice for inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. They may or may not have somebody with an intellectual disability in their network, family and friends, but they are incredibly curious and are very willing to learn. And on the topic of learning, that's where our celebrity supporters and our athletes, meaning our athletes with intellectual disabilities, they work together in unison. Again, that symbiotic relationship, people with and without intellectual disabilities working together to make things happen and make behavior change. And we call that a unified approach. And the unified approach is very much demonstrated through the interviews that some of our celebrity supporters engage in with our athletes, with media. It may be going to a particular event and just demonstrating their support for a particular athlete or a particular geography where we know that there are people with intellectual disabilities that greatly need help. So it really boils down to education and comfort. And comfort, I think, is incredibly important as well. And sometimes the education helps those professional athletes and amateur athletes, the celebrity supporters, get much more comfortable because they're learning from those with intellectual disabilities about what it means to be included and what it means to be excluded, so we could prevent that moving forward. So the unified approach is very important to us. And like Jordan mentioned, for her organization, we too have very rigorous training programs, not just for our athletes within Special Olympics, but also for all sorts of partners, whether it be a celebrity supporter in the form of a professional athlete, or whether it be some of our brand supporters like Coke, Microsoft, and United. And we have one athlete on my team, on my communications team, who does a brilliant job of getting people to feel comfortable in understanding the world of somebody with an intellectual disability. He calls it Welcome to My World. His name is Ben Collins, and he is fabulous at helping people understand a little bit more what those with intellectual disabilities face. If anyone's curious about that, I encourage you to visit specialolympics.org. But I will say that Our celebrity supporters are very grateful for those sessions, and they're much more comfortable when they do something with us one-to-one with media, something maybe with us at the Super Bowl with the NFL, which we do every year, or even it's working with the folks on Capitol Hill to talk about how much funding is really essential to help change the lives of people with intellectual disabilities.
I'll throw in one quick comment to you guys is, if I was advising an athlete who's, hesitant, I would say, number one, don't force it. And number two, don't feel like you have to champion every cause. And I think that's important. It's like, you don't have to take the weight of the world onto your shoulders, right? Usually what will happen is you will feel called to a certain cause, right? You will know from your experiences, from the community you've lived in or live in currently, that there's something bugging you that's unique to you. And that's, you want to follow that. And that's more likely to be effective when you actually have passion and experience in that cause area, rather than just kind of going with, whatever you see as quote unquote fashionable today.
Well, all great advice. And thank you for providing those examples. I think it really just helps ground the opportunities that emerging athletes have to learn from their peers, but also just more broadly within the organizations that they're partnering with. Taking a step back, what strikes me is like we've kind of been talking for about 40 minutes, really about the power, but also the responsibility of the athlete platform. And wanted to ask the panel, how do brands and athletes decide what they can take a stand on? So for instance, whether it's the war in Ukraine, overturn of Roe v. Wade, other social justice issues that seem to happen or be prominent week after week here in the US, like how do athletes and their partner brands determine when it's appropriate for them to weigh in on an issue in partnership together? It's a tough question, but I know you'll be up to the challenge to answer that one.
It is a hard one. I also, I'll point back to the previous comment I made, which is, don't force it and don't feel like you have to comment on everything. Now, how do you actually choose your cause areas? What are you going to comment on? I think you got to speak from the heart and be authentic and actually have conversations with your brand partners before you go out to market, if you will. Right. Probably it's worth maybe talking for 30 to 60 minutes with your direct points of contact at the company and be like, how do you feel about this? What does the company feel about this? How can we contribute? Are we the right people to contribute? That would be a good way to approach it, rather than just firing off tweets. I would not recommend firing off tweets. I would recommend having deep conversations with folks at your brand partners, and then you all can have a more measured approach on when you're going to speak on current events and social issues that are happening right now.
Yeah, for us, it's a little bit different, the dynamic, because we are the brand, and we're a nonprofit brand, and we represent a very specific community. So one of the things that we often look at is this our lane? Is this really the topic and the time, and in some cases the place, to voice our disagreement with a particular issue, a particular comment, what have you. We have so much work to do as a movement to help fight for inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. And we do work, as I mentioned, in sport, health, education, and leadership. That's enough to keep anybody busy for the rest of time. So we make sure to really understand what it is we represent, who we represent, and where we could have the most impact because of the work that we do each and every day, as opposed to just sharing an empty comment, if you will. We want to be able to support it with substance. We want to be able to support it with action. We want to be able to support it with community. And we're very fortunate to have an incredibly loyal and devoted community of people with and without intellectual disabilities, really clamoring for inclusion for people that right now are just not factored into many decisions across the globe by governments, by businesses, by healthcare organizations. So we definitely know what we can be very, very succinct at tackling and very potent at tackling, and what perhaps is a bit out of our comfort zone as an organization.
That's great. Well, I know we have only about 10 minutes left, and I want to give those on the line an opportunity to ask any questions. If you do, please feel free to type them in the chat. And if you have them directed at a specific panelist, please indicate that as well. So any questions from the group? Don't be shy. Well, as you think about that, I will throw one out there. So, we have a lot of individuals. Oh, we have one here from Annalise, just in time. Can you speak to when a brand athlete partnership led to change for a particular issue?
I have one on the tip of my tongue, so I might as well go for it. Stephen Curry, right? NBA champion. He also has a brand sponsorship with Callaway, which I don't know if you guys know about, but the purpose of that partnership was to increase diversity in the game of golf and increase access in the game of golf. The cool thing about that is that Steph donated millions of dollars to Howard University to revitalize their golf program. And Howard's one of the most famous HBCUs in the country. Revitalized the golf program, revitalized the golf course that the team practices at. Was actually about a mile up the road from where I live in DC. And now he's also started a tour, which is, I forget the exact name of it, but it's a tour for overlooked athletes, shall we say, in the golf space. And that is powerful. That is powerful. The fact that Steph would go outside of his primary sport to expand, access to a game that's been very exclusive in the past is pretty remarkable. It shows the power of partnerships. It shows the power of athlete brand partnerships to actually create opportunities for individuals.
Yeah, and I would say another example would be like Alicia Montano, who was my former ultra running teammate. She helped create And Mother to support mother runners, who first-time moms and trying to still navigate their running career, but also still being, a mom and very present in their children's lives. And as we've seen with issues like Kara Goucher and Allison Felix, who had really hard times with their former brand sponsor with Nike, just to have paid, maternity leave and to have every right to want to become a mom as an athlete. So I would say that was a big change, and especially with more recently, Allison Felix sponsorship with Athleta right now. They've created this specific program where it's allowing for childcare at races. So moms can come there and bring their kid and know that their kid is going to be taken care of, and know that they can still put everything that they have into that race that they're training for, an opportunity. So it's having those kinds of conversations and opening up the space for that. And creating an environment for mothers who still are breastfeeding, and they have breast pumping stations now. And those are starting to increase at all of these major races to create a more supportive environment. And then we're seeing other examples of kind of the more smaller athletes who are working with brands and companies to bring in more diverse athletes into their space, or at least collaborative opportunities to have them be part of campaigns and design work of, new clothing for that running company that is featuring a specific artist from their community or something like that. So that's been really cool to see in terms of a creative response, but also a very big impact response in, supporting mothers and women who are still choosing to be athletes and a mom as well.
Take a little bit of a different path on that response, on that question, with the response that I think people will find interesting, given that most people know us as a sports organization. So one of our biggest celebrity supporters is Chris Pratt. And we also have an amazing partnership with ESPN. As many of you know, ESPN is part of the Disney family, and a part of the Disney family is Marvel. Now, Chris, obviously, being a member of the Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, was recently shooting in Atlanta the latest film, and he took it upon himself to invite an athlete, meaning a person with intellectual disabilities, to be on staff, to be a part of the group that helped to produce this film. So behind the scenes, our athlete was a big part of the film's production. Chris was very much both learning and teaching at the same time. And we found that so many people from Marvel really were interested in what our athlete had to share, because they were learning more about people with intellectual disabilities and some of the things that perhaps they didn't have on their radar, or quite frankly, they were afraid to either ask or just afraid of. And that was a really interesting dynamic that we encourage a lot of individuals and brands to really embrace, because we do need to tackle the area of employment for people with intellectual disabilities. Employment for those that are not considered is something that really does need to be addressed. And unfortunately, many of our athletes and people with ID across the globe are not given their rightful chance to really demonstrate their amazing talent. So that really did change perceptions, not just within that team on that set, but also leading to the other question that was asked through social media, because Chris very much shared that information and that experience and images of him and our athlete with folks across, the galaxy. Sorry, had to go there.
I like it. That's great. So we have time for one last question, and I'll just pluck out the one from Erica. Where's the future of athlete activism going? I mean, are there any stakeholders or sectors that are currently missing from this conversation that you hope will be more involved going forward, especially as athletes are perhaps a little bit more encouraged to be more vocal?
Jordan, you want to go, or should I give it a shot?
Sure, I can go quick. I definitely think the future of athlete activism is going in the right direction. And as we are seeing, month after month, day after day, we're seeing more people speaking out and using sport as, a powerful platform for storytelling, for correcting their own narratives and speaking their own truth, and to shed light onto a lot of things that, up until more recently, are constantly being erased or made to be invisible, and not being inclusive of those voices or these issues that are very important and that impact everyone. And so I think it's headed in the right direction. And I would say my favorite part of that is just having conversations with people. And, I try and make myself to be as approachable as possible and personable as possible, especially on social media. Like, I will actively take the time to go through all of the DMs and respond to every single message, or to even see the requests, and making sure that I'm able to communicate. And that's how I've met some amazing athletes who are now some of our very own athlete advocates. And, it's part of that storytelling component too, of really elevating people's voices and messages. And as a new filmmaker, and someone who's made a couple films already, telling the stories of some incredible runners, doing amazing work within their own communities, I want to continue doing that. I want the world to see, who athletes are and what they're doing, because whether you're an athlete or not, there is always some piece to their story that someone can resonate with. And I think that can also have a very big impact on that person who's watching it, or it can inspire that person to maybe, I want to try running for the first time, or I want to try doing this, or I need to learn more about this, or inspiring the next generations of athletes to, come up into this space and continue the work that we're doing. Hopefully they don't have to do as much work, because we're trying to do the big groundbreaking, break glass ceiling moments, so that they can just come into this space already who they are, and not always having to be, I guess, maybe on the defensive of having to always fight for something, rather so that they can have a future they can celebrate and thrive and just be themselves.
I'll plant a seed for you guys since we're at time, which is I think the future is cross sports coalitions. Not just athletes as individuals. I think it's collective action. I think it's, the big leagues, both men's and women's, across sports forming coalitions rather than kind of each individual athlete, championing certain causes. I think collective action, coalitions, that's where the future of athlete activism is going.
That's great. Well, a huge thank you to Jason, Jordan, John for your insights and perspectives and your time. Really appreciate you being here. And thank you everyone who tuned in today. Thanks for your comments and participation. If you're interested in our next Event Impact Council, we're going to be promoting that on social media here pretty soon. Otherwise, if you want to engage with the Impact Relations Institute, best way is probably to sign up for the monthly newsletter called The Agenda, which you can do on the website. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend and hope you can either watch a sport, participate in a sport, volunteer, stay engaged. And stay safe out there. Thanks, everyone.